Today's story is all about family. And as we all know, family can be complicated, but it's also our greatest source of joy, and we should always try to share a laugh together. That's why I'm so excited about the Advent Calendar 2025. Mom Jokes. It's a wonderful audio and ebook with 24 days of clean, family-friendly humor that everyone, from grandkids to adults, will genuinely enjoy. It's perfect for pre-Christmas to start a new, happy tradition. The link to get yours is in the pinned comment. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Now, let's get to the story I wanted to share with you. I stood on the sidewalk outside a place called the Gilded Fork in downtown Chicago, clutching a large, wrapped bundle against my chest. The wind off the lake was bitter, cutting right through my coat, but the chill I felt had nothing to do with the weather. It was the knot in my stomach. This was the rehearsal dinner. My son, Nicholas, was getting married the next day. A mother is supposed to be bursting with joy on a weekend like this, isn't she? She's supposed to be dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief and telling everyone how lucky the bride is. But as I looked through the glass windows of the bistro, seeing the golden lighting and the waiters moving like dancers in black vests, I didn't feel joy. I felt like I was about to walk into a lion's den without a shield. I looked down at the package in my arms. It wasn't small, and it certainly wasn't wrapped in the silver and white paper that seemed to be the theme of this wedding. It was wrapped in simple brown butcher paper with a navy blue ribbon, Nicholas's favorite color growing up. Inside was a quilt. It wasn't just any blanket you buy at a department store. I had spent the last 8 months stitching it by hand. I had used squares of fabric from the flannel shirts my late husband, Nicholas's father, used to wear. I incorporated pieces of Nicholas's old high school baseball jersey and the blue blanket he was brought home from the hospital in. It was the story of his life, and the story of the father who wasn't here to see him get married. It was the most precious thing I owned, and I wanted to give it to Nicholas and Sylvia tonight, a symbol that she was joining our history. I took a deep breath, fixed my hair in the reflection of the window, and pushed open the heavy glass door. The warmth hit me first, smelling of expensive truffles and searing steak. The noise was a dull roar of laughter and clinking glasses. I took 3 steps inside, scanning the room for my boy, when a figure stepped directly into my path. It was Caroline Whitford, Sylvia's mother. She was a tall woman, always perfectly put together in a way that made you feel messy just by standing next to her. Tonight, she was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my car. Her hair was stiff, sprayed into a helmet of blonde perfection. She didn't smile. She didn't open her arms to welcome me. She just stopped, blocked my way, and looked down at the bundle in my arms. "Judith," she said. It wasn't a greeting. It was an acknowledgement of a nuisance, like finding a fly in your soup. "You're here." "Hello, Caroline," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The place looks lovely." She didn't respond to the compliment. Her eyes were glued to the brown paper package I was holding. Her nose wrinkled slightly, as if the package smelled bad. "What on earth is that?" she asked, gesturing vaguely with her wine glass. "It's a gift," I said, lifting it slightly, "for Nicholas and Sylvia. I wanted to give it to them tonight, before the madness of tomorrow. It's a family tradition." Caroline cut me off with a sharp laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Oh, Judith, look around you." She swept her hand across the room. "This is a curated event. We have a minimalist aesthetic. Clean lines. White. Silver. Glass." She took a step closer, lowering her voice, though the venom remained. "That giant brown thing is going to stick out like a sore thumb. We can't have you lugging that around while the photographer is taking candid shots. It ruins the visual." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. "It's a quilt," I said, my grip tightening on the package. It has Nicholas's father's shirts in it. It's meaningful. Caroline rolled her eyes. She actually rolled them. How rustic, she said flatly. Then, without asking, she reached out and took the package from my hands. She didn't hold it with care. She held it like it was a bag of trash she needed to dispose of. Let's put that under a table somewhere, she said, turning away from me, so it doesn't clutter the aesthetic. You can take it back when you leave. She walked over to a service station where the waiters stacked dirty trays and shoved my handmade quilt, my heart and soul, underneath the tablecloth, kicking it deeper into the shadows with the toe of her expensive heel. I stood there, empty-handed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march over there, grab my gift, and leave. But then I saw him. Across the room, Nicholas was laughing. He looked so handsome in his suit, his dark hair combed back the way I liked it. He looked happy. Or, at least, he was trying to look happy. If I made a scene now, if I fought with his future mother-in-law 5 minutes after walking in, I would be the villain. I would be the one ruining his night. So, I swallowed the lump in my throat. I smoothed my dress, a sensible navy wrap dress I had bought at Macy's, and decided to endure it. For him. Where should I sit? I asked Caroline's back as she returned, dusting her hands as if touching my gift had dirted them. She pointed a manicured finger toward the back of the room, near the swinging kitchen doors. Table 9. It's mostly Sylvia's distant cousins and some of the office staff. We wanted the head table to be cohesive. Cohesive. That was a polite way of saying rich and beautiful. I walked through the crowded room. I passed the head table. I saw the place cards. Caroline, Richard, Sylvia, Nicholas. And then, next to Nicholas, sat Caroline's brother. Not me. The groom's mother wasn't at the head table. I made it to table 9. It was dark back there, and every time the kitchen door swung open, a blast of steam and the sound of shouting chefs spilled out. I sat down next to a young girl who was scrolling on her phone and a man who didn't look up from his soup. I sat there for 20 minutes, unnoticed. I watched the room. It's amazing what you see when you're invisible. I saw Caroline working the room like a politician. She touched shoulders, threw her head back laughing, and made sure every eye was on her. But I also saw how she treated the staff. She snapped her fingers at a waiter to refill her wine without looking at him. She physically moved a bridesmaid's arm because she didn't like how she was standing. She was controlling everything. And I watched Nicholas. He was looking for someone. I saw him craning his neck, scanning the entrance, looking at the front tables. He was looking for me. I sat up straighter, about to wave, to let him know I was back here in the shadows. But the moment he started to stand up, Caroline was there. She put a hand on his shoulder, heavy, dominant. She whispered something in his ear and pointed toward a group of wealthy-looking guests near the bar. She physically turned his body away from my direction and pushed him toward them. I saw Nicholas hesitate. He looked back one more time, his face clouded with worry. But Sylvia appeared on his other side, hooked her arm through his, and pulled. He was trapped. He was being managed. I looked down at my empty plate. The waiter finally came by and dropped a bread roll on my dish without stopping. "You must be a friend of the family," the man next to me said, finally looking up. "I'm the groom's mother," I said quietly. The man paused, his spoon halfway to his mouth. He looked at the head table where Caroline was holding court, and then back at me sitting by the kitchen door. He looked embarrassed for me. "Oh," he said, "I see." I looked over at the service station in the corner. I could just see the edge of the brown paper sticking out from under the tablecloth where the dirty dishes were being stacked. My husband's flannel shirts, my son's baby blanket, treating it like garbage. I took a sip of water. It was warm. Don't cry, Judith, I whispered to myself. Do not let them see you cry. But as I watched Caroline laugh and clink her glass against my son's, a cold realization settled over me. This wasn't just poor manners. This wasn't just a controlling woman planning a wedding. This was an erasure. She was trying to scrub me out of the picture. She wanted the son, the status, and the wedding, but she didn't want the mother who built the man. I gripped the tablecloth. They thought I was weak. They thought because I sat in the back and didn't make a fuss, I would just fade away. They had no idea who they were dealing with. A waiter was moving through the crowd with a tray of water glasses. As he passed Caroline, she spun around suddenly, throwing her arms out in a dramatic gesture for the photographer. Her elbow slammed into the waiter's arm. The tray tipped. A cascade of ice water flew through the air. It splashed heavily onto the carpet, inches from the hem of my gown. A few drops hit my shoes, but by some miracle, the dress was spared. The waiter looked terrified. I'm so sorry, ma'am, he stammered. Caroline didn't look at the waiter. She looked at me. She looked at my dry dress. And for a split second, I saw disappointment in her eyes. She had wanted it to hit me. Then the mask slipped back on. She covered her mouth with her hand. Oh my goodness! Look at that mess. She stepped closer to me, lowering her voice, so only I could hear. She looked at my dress, the one I had felt so good in just minutes ago. Lucky miss, she hissed. But do be careful, Judith. We don't want you looking any frumpier than you already do. The blue is a bit matronly, isn't it? She patted my arm, dismissed the waiter with a wave, and turned back to the camera. All right, everyone, let's get a shot of the bride with her real mother. I felt small. I felt like a piece of furniture that didn't match the decor. The word frumpy echoed in my head. Just then, the door opened. Nicholas walked in. He was wearing his tuxedo, but his tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck. He looked pale. His eyes were red-rimmed, as if he hadn't slept either. He didn't look like a groom about to marry the love of his life. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. He scanned the room, ignoring the squeals of the bridesmaids. His eyes locked on mine. Mom, he said. He sounded relieved just to say the word. He walked over to me, ignoring Caroline, ignoring Sylvia. He hugged me. He held on tight, like he used to when he was a little boy and had a bad dream. I felt him trembling slightly. You look beautiful, he said, pulling back. I like the blue. Thank you, sweetheart, I said, my voice thick. He looked around the chaotic room, then leaned in close to me. Is everything okay? Has Caroline been? He trailed off, looking at his future mother-in-law, who was currently shouting at the photographer about lighting angles. I looked at my son. I saw the dark circles under his eyes. I saw the anxiety radiating off him. I had a choice right then. I could tell him. She made me get ready in a public bathroom next to an ice machine. I could tell him she called me a disgrace and tried to ruin my dress. I could tell him that these people were cruel and shallow. If I told him, he might snap. He might cause a scene. But it would ruin his wedding day. He would spend the next 10 hours fighting, miserable, and stressed. I was his mother. My job was to take the pain, so he didn't have to. So I reached up and straightened his collar. I began to tie his bow tie, my fingers moving automatically through the motions I had practiced 100 times on his father. Everything is fine, Nicholas. I lied. I forced a smile onto my face, masking the hurt in my heart. Everyone is just nervous. It's going to be a beautiful day. He exhaled, his shoulders dropping 2 inches. He believed me. Or maybe he just needed to believe me. Okay, he whispered. Okay, I patted his cheek. I love you. Now let's get you married. I chose silence. I chose peace for my son. But as I watched him walk over to his bride, who didn't even stand up to greet him, I wondered if my silence was protecting him or if I was just leading a lamb to the slaughter. A waiter was moving through the crowd with a tray of water glasses. As he passed Caroline, she spun around suddenly, throwing her arms out in a dramatic gesture for the photographer. Her elbow slammed into the waiter's arm. The tray tipped. A cascade of ice water flew through the air. It splashed heavily onto the carpet, inches from the hem of my gown. A few drops hit my shoes, but by some miracle, the dress was spared. The waiter looked terrified. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," he stammered. Caroline didn't look at the waiter. She looked at me. She looked at my dry dress. And for a split second, I saw disappointment in her eyes. She had wanted it to hit me. Then the mask slipped back on. She covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh my goodness! Look at that mess." She stepped closer to me, lowering her voice so only I could hear. She looked at my dress, the one I had felt so good in just minutes ago. "Lucky miss," she hissed. "But do be careful, Judith. We don't want you looking any frumpier than you already do. The blue is a bit matronly, isn't it?" She patted my arm, dismissed the waiter with a wave, and turned back to the camera. "All right, everyone, let's get a shot of the bride with her real mother." I felt small. I felt like a piece of furniture that didn't match the decor. The word frumpy echoed in my head. Just then, the door opened. Nicholas walked in. He was wearing his tuxedo, but his tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck. He looked pale. His eyes were red-rimmed, as if he hadn't slept either. He didn't look like a groom about to marry the love of his life. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. He scanned the room, ignoring the squeals of the bridesmaids. His eyes locked on mine. "Mom," he said. He sounded relieved just to say the word. He walked over to me, ignoring Caroline, ignoring Sylvia. He hugged me. He held on tight, like he used to when he was a little boy and had a bad dream. I felt him trembling slightly. "You look beautiful," he said, pulling back. "I like the blue." "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick. He looked around the chaotic room, then leaned in close to me. Is everything okay? Has Caroline been?" He trailed off, looking at his future mother-in-law, who was currently shouting at the photographer about lighting angles. I looked at my son. I saw the dark circles under his eyes. I saw the anxiety radiating off him. I had a choice right then. I could tell him. She made me get ready in a public bathroom next to an ice machine. I could tell him she called me a disgrace and tried to ruin my dress. I could tell him that these people were cruel and shallow. If I told him, he might snap. He might cause a scene. But it would ruin his wedding day. He would spend the next 10 hours fighting, miserable, and stressed. I was his mother. My job was to take the pain, so he didn't have to. So I reached up and straightened his collar. I began to tie his bow tie, my fingers moving automatically through the motions I had practiced 100 times on his father. "Everything is fine, Nicholas," I lied. I forced a smile onto my face, masking the hurt in my heart. "Everyone is just nervous. It's going to be a beautiful day." He exhaled, his shoulders dropping 2 inches. He believed me. Or maybe he just needed to believe me. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." I patted his cheek. "I love you. Now let's get you married." I chose silence. I chose peace for my son. But as I watched him walk over to his bride, who didn't even stand up to greet him, I wondered if my silence was protecting him or if I was just leading a lamb to the slaughter. The drive to the church was silent. I rode in a hired car with Nicholas's best man. a sweet boy named David whom he'd known since college. David tried to make small talk about the weather and the traffic, but I could tell he was just as nervous as I was. We both stared out the window as the city skyline blurred past, heading toward the old stone cathedral in the heart of the district. When we arrived, the church was breathtaking. It was one of those places with ceilings that seemed to reach heaven, stained glass windows that turned the sunlight into pools of red and blue on the stone floor, and rows of dark wooden pews that smelled of lemon polish and beeswax. It was grand. It was holy, but it was also freezing cold. I walked into the vestibule, clutching my small purse. The air was thick with the scent of expensive lilies. Thousands of them. White lilies were everywhere, wrapping around the pillars, cascading down the altar, lining the aisle. It looked less like a wedding and more like a royal funeral. I took a deep breath, straightened my spine, and walked toward the entrance of the sanctuary. A young usher stood there, holding a clipboard. He looked to be about 20, wearing a suit that was slightly too big for him. He smiled politely as I approached. "Name, please?" he asked. "Judith Hoffman," I said, offering a warm smile. "I'm the groom's mother." He ran his finger down the list, his brow furrowing. He stopped at a name, checked a note written in red ink next to it, and then looked back at me. His smile faltered. Yes, Mrs. Hoffman," he said, shifting his weight uncomfortably. "Right this way." He started walking, but he didn't head toward the front pew on the right side, where the groom's parents always sit. Instead, he stopped at the second row. The first row was empty, save for a reserved sign. "Here you are, ma'am," he said, gesturing to the spot behind a large marble pillar. "If you could slide in here, please." I looked at him. I looked at the empty front row. I looked at the second row, which was already filling up with people I vaguely recognized as Sylvia's distant cousins and some business partners of her father. "There must be a mistake," I said quietly, keeping my voice low so the guests behind me wouldn't hear. "I'm Nicholas's mother." "The mother sits in the front row." The usher turned red. He looked down at his clipboard again, as if hoping the ink would change. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was given strict instructions. The front row is reserved for the aesthetic of the bridal party photos. I was told to seat you in row 2. Strict instructions." I didn't need to ask who gave them. I could hear Caroline's voice in my head, talking about clean lines and cohesion. She didn't want me in the front. She didn't want me in the pictures that would be taken from the aisle. She wanted me hidden behind a pillar. For a moment, I felt that familiar sting of humiliation. It would be so easy to just sit down. It would be easier to just do what I was told and disappear into the second row. That's what I had done at the rehearsal dinner. That's what I had done in the makeup room. But then I looked at the altar where my son would be standing in 10 minutes. No, I was the one who bandaged his knees when he fell off his bike. I was the one who sat up with him all night when he had the flu. I was the one who taught him how to tie that tie he was wearing today. I had earned my seat. "Young man," I said, my voice gentle but as hard as steel, "I appreciate you doing your job, but I am the mother of the groom, and I am sitting in the front." I didn't wait for his permission. I walked past him, stepped into the empty front row, and sat down right in the center seat. The usher stood there with his mouth open for a second, then panicked and hurried away to find someone else to deal with me. But by the time he disappeared, the organ music swelled. It was too late to move me without making a scene. I sat there, alone in the pew. My husband's spot next to me was empty, and I placed my hand on the wood, wishing he was there to hold it. "Give me strength, John," I whispered. "Help me get through this." A moment later, the doors opened again. Caroline made her entrance. She walked down the aisle not like a mother, but like a queen greeting her subjects. She was wearing a silver dress that shimmered under the lights. She smiled left and right, nodding to the guests. Then she saw me. She saw me sitting in the front row, unobstructed, right where I belonged. Her step faltered for a fraction of a second. Her smile didn't drop, but her eyes narrowed into slits. She glared at me across the aisle with a look so cold it could have frozen the holy water. If looks could kill, I would have dropped dead right there on the kneeler. I didn't look away. I nodded to her, polite and calm. She stiffened, marched to her seat in the front row on the bride's side, and sat down aggressively, smoothing her skirt as if she were trying to crush something beneath it. The ceremony began. The priest said words about love and commitment, about two families becoming one. It all sounded nice, but it felt like a performance. Then Nicholas stepped out. He stood at the altar, hands clasped in front of him. He looked handsome, but he looked rigid. His knuckles were white. He wasn't looking at the guests. He was staring at a spot on the floor. When Sylvia walked down the aisle, the congregation gasped. She was undeniably beautiful. Her dress was a masterpiece of lace and silk, costing more than what I made in a year. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale. But as she reached the altar and took Nicholas's hands, I saw something that broke my heart. She didn't squeeze his hand. She didn't look into his eyes with that soft, secret look that lovers share. She immediately reached up and adjusted his boutonniere. Because it was slightly crooked, she fixed him. Even at the altar, she was fixing him. Then came the vows. Nicholas, my son began. His voice didn't boom. It didn't ring out with confidence. It cracked. Take you, Sylvia. He sounded breathless, not the breathless of a man overwhelmed by love, but the shallow, panicked breathing of a man who realizes the walls are closing in. I leaned forward in my pew, my hands gripping my purse so hard my fingers ached. Look at me, Nicholas, I thought. Just look at me. But he didn't. He looked at Sylvia, and I saw fear. I saw a man who was terrified of making a mistake. He was terrified of saying the wrong word, of sweating too much, of embarrassing this perfect, radiant family he was marrying into. To love and to cherish, he whispered. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of joy. It was grief. I was watching my son shrink. I was watching the bright, funny, confident boy I raised dissolve into a prop for someone else's perfect picture. Caroline, from across the aisle, let out a loud, theatrical sniffle and dabbed her dry eyes with a handkerchief. She was loving every second of this. She had won. She had acquired the perfect son-in-law to complete her set, as the priest pronounced them man and wife, and Nicholas leaned in to kiss his bride. He didn't close his eyes. He kept them open for a split second, and in that moment, his gaze flickered to the front row. He saw me. He saw me sitting there, alone in the seat I had fought for. And for the first time all day, his shoulders dropped. A look of profound sadness washed over his face before he masked it with a smile for the crowd. He knew, in that split second, he knew that I saw the truth. He knew that I wasn't fooled by the flowers or the music or the dress. He knew that I saw his fear. I sat back in the pew as the recessional music blasted from the organ pipes. The happy couple marched back down the aisle, guests cheering and clapping. I clapped too. I smiled. But inside, I was praying harder than I had ever prayed in my life. Lord, I prayed, let him be strong enough. I raised him to be kind, but please let him be strong enough to survive them. Because if he isn't, this isn't a marriage. It's a life sentence. I watched them disappear out the heavy oak doors, and I gathered my things. The ceremony was over. Now came the reception. And I had a feeling the real show was just beginning. The reception was held in the grand ballroom of a historic hotel downtown, the kind of place where the chandeliers are the size of small cars and the carpet is so thick it swallows your heels. It was undeniably magnificent. The ceilings were painted with clouds and cherubs, and the walls were lined with gold-framed mirrors that multiplied the crowd into infinity. But as I walked in, clutching my purse against my side, I didn't feel the warmth of a celebration. I felt cold. The air conditioning was blasting, yes, but it was more than that. The room felt sterile. It was a display of wealth, not a gathering of families. The tables were set with towering centerpieces made of white orchids and crystals that dripped down like frozen raindrops. You couldn't even see the person sitting across from you through the flowers. It was designed to impress, not to encourage conversation. I found my table, table 14. It wasn't in the kitchen, thank goodness, but it was far from the dance floor. It was near the service entrance where the waiters marched in and out with heavy trays. I sat down. The other seats at my table were empty for now. I watched the room fill up. I saw Sylvia's family, the Whitfords, holding court near the head table. They were laughing, drinking champagne, and greeting guests with kisses on both cheeks. They looked like they owned the world. Caroline was in her element, flitting from group to group, pointing out the ice sculpture, the band, the lighting. She was performing. Then I saw Nicholas. He was standing near the bar with Sylvia. He had a glass of scotch in his hand, his second or third. I noted he wasn't smiling. Sylvia was busy fixing her hair in a reflection in the window, ignoring him. My son looked like a prop in someone else's play. He looked lonely in a room of 300 people. I wanted to go to him. I wanted to tell him to loosen his tie, to breathe, to remember that he was a good man. But I stayed in my seat. I didn't want to cause another scene. I didn't want Caroline to swoop in and accuse me of hovering. After about 30 minutes of sitting alone, nodding politely to strangers who looked at me with pity, I needed a break. The noise of the jazz band and the clinking silverware was giving me a headache. I stood up and headed toward the ladies' lounge. The restroom at this hotel was nicer than my entire living room. It had a sitting area with velvet chaises, a wall of mirrors, and fresh towels rolled up in baskets. It was quiet in there. I walked into one of the stalls and locked the door, just needing a moment of silence. I closed my eyes and leaned my forehead against the cool metal door. Just get through the dinner, I told myself. Eat the cake, hug your son, and go home. I was about to unlock the door when I heard the main door open. 2 women walked in. Their heels clicked sharply on the marble floor. I can't believe she actually sat in the front row. One voice said, I recognized it. It was a woman named Beverly, one of Caroline's bridge partners. She had a voice like a cheese grater. I know, a second voice replied. Caroline was livid. She told me she specifically assigned the usher to put her in row 2. The audacity. I froze. My hand hovered over the latch. They were talking about me. Well, Beverly said, the sound of a makeup bag unzipping filling the silence. You have to understand why Caroline is so protective. She's trying to save Sylvia from a bad investment. What do you mean? The other woman asked. Oh, come on. You know the situation. Beverly lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, but it echoed clearly in the tiled room. Nicholas is a sweet boy, but he comes with baggage. And by baggage, I mean her. My heart hammered against my ribs. Caroline told me the truth last week. Beverly continued. Apparently, the mother is completely destitute. She's a leech. Nicholas has been paying her mortgage for years. He's basically her retirement plan. That's why she's clinging to him so tight. She's terrified that once he marries Sylvia, the money train will stop. No, the other woman gasped. She looks so normal. A bit plain, but normal. It's a grift, Beverly scoffed. She plays the poor, sacrificing widow, but she's draining him dry. Caroline is just trying to make sure Sylvia's inheritance doesn't end up paying for that woman's electric bill. I stood there in the stall, my entire body turning to ice. A lie. A vicious, ugly, poisonous lie. I looked down at my hands. These hands had scrubbed floors. These hands had typed until they cramped. I had worked 2 jobs after my husband died. I worked at the library during the day and did medical transcription at night. I paid off my mortgage 5 years early. I had a pension. I had savings. I had never taken a dime from Nicholas. In fact, I had given him the down payment for his first condo. Caroline had invented this. She had painted me as a parasite to justify her cruelty. She needed a reason to treat me like garbage. So she made one up. Rage, hot and blinding, flared up in my chest. I wanted to kick the door open. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to drag them out to the ballroom and demand Caroline tell the truth. But then I stopped. If I screamed, I was the crazy mother. If I yelled, I was trashy. If I defended myself, I looked guilty. No, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I wouldn't let them see me sweat. I took a deep breath. I smoothed my dress. I reached out and flushed the toilet. The sound was like a cannon blast in the quiet room. Outside the stall, the talking stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with panic. I unlocked the door slowly. Click. I pushed it open and stepped out. Beverly and her friend were standing at the sinks. Beverly had a tube of lipstick halfway to her mouth. Her friend was holding a compact. They were frozen statues. Their eyes went wide as they saw me in the mirror. They saw the leech. They saw the baggage. They looked terrified. They knew I had heard every word. I didn't look at them directly. I walked calmly to the sink between them. I turned on the faucet. The water rushed out, warm and soothing. I pumped the soap. I washed my hands, taking my time. I scrubbed each finger deliberately, methodically. The women didn't move. They didn't breathe. They were waiting for the explosion. They were waiting for me to yell. I turned off the water. I reached for a linen towel and dried my hands, patting them gently. Then, and only then, did I look up. I met Beverly's eyes in the mirror. She looked pale beneath her heavy bronzer. She looked small. I didn't scowl. I didn't frown. I simply smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile a mother gives a child who has just told a very obvious lie. It was a smile that said, I know exactly who you are, and you are beneath me. Lovely ceremony, wasn't it? I said softly. My voice didn't shake. Enjoy the reception. Ladies. I dropped the used towel into the wicker basket. I turned on my heel and walked out of the restroom. I didn't look back, but as the heavy doors swung shut behind me, I heard one of them let out a long, shaky exhale. I walked back toward the ballroom, my heels clicking on the marble. I felt different. The hurt was still there, burning in my chest, but something else had joined it. Clarity. I realized then that this wasn't just about a wedding. This was a war. Caroline wasn't just mean, she was dangerous. She was willing to destroy my reputation to keep control of her daughter and my son. I walked back into the grand ballroom, the music hitting me like a physical wave. I saw Caroline across the room, laughing with another group, unaware that her soldiers had just been ambushed. I sat back down at table 14. I placed my napkin in my lap. I looked at the head table. You can lie about me, I thought, staring at Caroline's perfectly sprayed hair. You can try to hide me, but I am still his mother, and I am not going anywhere. I was ready. Whatever she planned to do next, I was ready. Dinner was served with the kind of mechanical precision that makes you feel like you're on an assembly line rather than at a celebration. Waiters in white gloves dropped plates of filet mignon and lobster tail in front of us, then vanished before you could ask for salt. The food looked beautiful, tiny vegetables arranged in geometric patterns, swirls of sauce that looked like paintings, but when I took a bite, it was cold. It tasted like nothing. It was just expensive filler. At table 14, the conversation was sparse. The people sitting with me were distant relatives who clearly wished they were at a better table. They ate quickly, eyes darting around the room, hoping to spot someone famous or important. I mostly pushed the food around my plate. I wasn't hungry. My stomach was still in knots from the conversation I had overheard in the bathroom. Every time I looked up, I felt like eyes were burning into me, judging the leech who was supposedly draining her son's bank account. The wine, however, was flowing freely. I watched the waiters circling the room like sharks, filling glasses the moment they were half empty. And nobody's glass was being refilled more often than Caroline Whitford's. From my seat near the back, I had a clear view of the head table. Caroline was animated. She was laughing too loudly, her hand resting frequently on the arm of the man next to her, gesturing wildly with her champagne flute. Her cheeks were flushed a deep, unnatural pink. She looked like a woman who felt she had won a great victory and was now enjoying the spoils of war. The jazz band wound down their set, and the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the dance floor and the head table. The chatter in the room died down to a low hum. It was time for the toasts. The best man, David, went first. He was nervous, bless his heart. He tapped the microphone 3 times, making a loud, thumping sound that made everyone wince. He gave a short, sweet speech about how Nicholas was the most loyal friend he'd ever had, and how he hoped Sylvia knew what a good man she was getting. It was genuine. It was kind. Nicholas smiled at him, a real smile, the first one I'd seen in hours. Then David sat down, and the MC announced the mother of the bride. Caroline stood up. She didn't just stand. She launched herself upward. She grabbed the microphone with a grip that turned her knuckles white. She swayed, just a fraction of an inch, and I saw her husband reach out to steady her elbow. She shook him off. She was ready for her moment. "Hello, everyone," she boomed. Her voice was too loud, distorted by the speakers. She giggled, a high-pitched, girlish sound that didn't match the predator I knew she was. "Oh, isn't this night just magical? I mean, look around. We did it. We really did it." There was a polite ripple of applause. Caroline beamed, basking in it. "You know," she continued, wandering out from behind the table, the microphone cord trailing behind her like a snake. "When Sylvia was a little girl, she used to dress up in my pearls and tell me, 'Mommy, I want to marry a prince.' And I told her, 'Darling, you deserve nothing less than a kingdom.' And tonight, well, look at this. We gave her a kingdom, didn't we?" She gestured grandly to the crystal chandeliers, the walls of flowers, the sheer expense of the room. It was a brag, plain and simple. She was telling everyone, "Look how rich we are." But Caroline said, her tone shifting. She took a long sip of her champagne, draining the glass, and held it out for a waiter to refill immediately. Princes are hard to find these days. Sometimes you don't find a prince. Sometimes you find a project. The room went quiet. A few people chuckled, nervously, thinking it was a joke. I saw Nicholas stiffen in his chair. "I'm kidding, I'm kidding." Caroline waved a hand dismissively, though her eyes weren't smiling. "Nicholas is a sturdy young man. When he first came to us, we were a little worried. You know how it is. Different backgrounds, different tax brackets." She laughed again. This time, nobody joined her. The silence in the room grew heavier, but we welcomed him. Caroline shouted, her voice slurring slightly. "We opened our home. We opened our hearts. We polished him up, put him in a tuxedo, and look at him now. He almost fits in." She looked down at Nicholas. He was staring at his plate, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle was jumping in his cheek. Sylvia was sipping her wine, looking bored, playing with the stem of her glass. She wasn't stopping her mother. But seriously, Caroline continued, pacing back and forth, we are here to celebrate a new beginning, a new chapter for Sylvia, a chapter where she doesn't have to worry about anything because her family, her real family, has her back. She paused, her eyes scanning the room. She was looking for something, or someone. My heart began to pound. I knew. I felt it coming like a freight train. Because family is important, Caroline said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. We all want what's best for our children. We want them to soar. We don't want them to be dragged down by anchors. She turned. The spotlight seemed to follow her gaze. She looked past the head table, past the dance floor, past the expensive guests, directly to the back of the room, directly at table 14. I'm sure many of you have noticed, she said, her voice dripping with venom. We have an extra guest tonight. Someone who didn't quite get the memo about the dress code, or the vibe, or decency. I stopped breathing. The blood rushed in my ears. Every head in the ballroom turned. Hundreds of eyes followed Caroline's gaze and landed on me. I felt naked. I felt small. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. Caroline raised her glass, pointing it at me like a weapon. We're here to celebrate, she said, her voice clear and sharp, cutting through the silence. But let's be honest. Look at that table. That's not a mother. That's a disgrace in a dress. The words hung in the air. That's not a mother. That's a disgrace in a dress. It was the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to me. It wasn't just an insult to my appearance. It was an insult to my entire existence. She was telling 300 people that I was garbage, that I was the leech she had whispered about in the bathroom, that I was a stain on her perfect white wedding. The room froze. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The waiters stopped pouring wine. The band members looked down at their shoes. The shock was absolute. Even in a room full of arrogant, wealthy people, there is a line you don't cross. Caroline had just sprinted across it. I sat there, my hands trembling in my lap. I looked at Nicholas. He was staring at his mother-in-law, his face pale, his mouth slightly open. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. Then I looked at Sylvia. This was the woman my son had just pledged his life to. This was the woman who was supposed to be my daughter. Surely she would be horrified. Surely she would stand up and take the microphone away. Surely she would say, "Mother, that is enough." I met Sylvia's eyes. She looked at me. Then she looked at her mother, who was smirking, waiting for applause that wasn't coming. Sylvia brought her hand to her mouth. Her shoulders shook, and she giggled. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It wasn't a laugh of shock. It was a mean little titter. It was the laugh of a high school bully who enjoys seeing the unpopular kid get roasted. She found it funny. She thought her mother calling me a disgrace was amusing. That sound, that small, cruel giggle, was louder to me than the microphone. It echoed in my head, shattering whatever hope I had left for this family. I looked back at Nicholas. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at Sylvia. He was watching his new wife laugh at his mother's humiliation. I saw the change happen in real time. I saw the confusion in his eyes vanish, replaced by something cold and hard. It was as if a veil had been lifted. He looked at Sylvia's laughing face, then at Caroline's smug grin, and he realized he was sitting in a nest of vipers. The silence stretched on for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. It felt like a lifetime. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I sat perfectly still, my back straight, refusing to crumble. If they wanted to call me a disgrace, I would show them what dignity looked like. But Inside, I was screaming, and I prayed that my son could hear it. The echo of Caroline's words, "disgrace in a dress," seemed to hang in the air like toxic smoke. The ballroom was frozen. 300 people were staring at me. I could feel the heat rising up my neck, a mix of shame and anger, so intense it made my vision blur. But I didn't look down. I looked at my son. Nicholas was still sitting at the head table. Sylvia's giggle had faded into a nervous smirk, and she reached out a hand to touch his arm, as if to say, "It was just a joke. Relax." Nicholas didn't relax. He moved. He didn't jump up. He didn't slam his fist on the table. He didn't throw his champagne glass against the wall. He did something much more terrifying. He moved slowly. He pushed his chair back. The scrape of the wooden legs against the parquet floor was the only sound in the cavernous room. It was a harsh, grinding noise that made people flinch. He stood up to his full height. He buttoned his suit jacket with calm, deliberate movements. He didn't look at Sylvia. He didn't look at Caroline. He looked straight ahead, his face a mask of absolute cold stone. Sylvia tugged at his sleeve. "Nick," she whispered, loud enough for the front tables to hear. "Sit down. Mom was just being funny." He didn't even blink. He pulled his arm away from her, not violently, but firmly, like he was removing a piece of lint from his coat. He stepped away from the head table. He walked past Caroline. She was still standing there with the microphone, a confused smile plastered on her face, waiting for him to laugh, waiting for him to fall back in line. He didn't even acknowledge her existence. He walked right past her, as if she were a ghost. He walked across the dance floor. His footsteps were steady. Click, click, click. Every eye followed him. He walked up to the stage where the jazz band was set up. The band leader looked terrified, clutching his saxophone. Nicholas walked over to the main stand where the audio receiver was. He reached out and flipped the switch. Pop! The speakers gave a short burst of static, and then they went dead. The low hum of the sound system vanished. The room wasn't just quiet now. It was dead silent. There was no white noise to hide behind. You could hear the ice melting in the glasses. You could hear the frantic breathing of the guests. Nicholas stepped off the stage. He turned and began to walk toward me. He had to cross the entire length of the ballroom to get to table 14. It was a long walk, and he took his time. He walked with his head up, his shoulders back. He wasn't the nervous, cowering boy who had stuttered through his vows an hour ago. He was a man. He was a man on a mission. As he got closer, I saw his eyes. They weren't filled with tears. They were filled with clarity. He saw me. He really saw me. He saw the mother who had raised him on a single income. He saw the woman who had stayed up late, sewing a quilt that was currently kicked under a dirty table. He saw the woman who had been bullied, insulted, and hidden away, and who had taken it all without saying a word just to keep the peace for him. He reached my table. The distant relatives sitting with me leaned away, afraid of what he might do. Nicholas stopped in front of me. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked soft. He looked like my son again. He extended his hand. "Mom," he said. His voice wasn't amplified by a microphone, but in the dead silence of that room, it carried to every corner. "Stand up, please." I looked at his hand. It was steady. I reached out and took it. His grip was warm and strong. He pulled me gently to my feet. He didn't let go of my hand. He tucked it into the crook of his arm, pulling me close to his side. He patted my hand with his other hand, a gesture so tender it made my throat tight. Then he turned around. He faced the head table. He faced Caroline, who was starting to look flushed and panicked. He faced Sylvia, whose mouth was hanging open. Nicholas didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke in a normal conversational tone, the kind of tone you use when you are stating a simple, undeniable fact. "You are right, Caroline. Nicholas said. A gasp went through the room. Caroline's eyes widened, a flicker of hope appearing on her face. She thought he was agreeing with her. She thought he was about to throw me under the bus to save his social standing. She doesn't belong here, Nicholas continued, his voice steady as a rock. He looked around the room, making eye contact with the wealthy guests, the business partners, the people who had stared at me with pity and judgment all night. She doesn't belong here, he said, because this room is filled with people who think money buys class. He paused, letting the words sink in. It doesn't, he said. You have all the money in the world, Caroline, but you have no class. You have no dignity, and you have no heart. My mother has more class in her little finger than you have in your entire bloodline. Caroline's face turned a violent shade of purple. She opened her mouth to speak, to screech, to demand he stop, but no sound came out. She was paralyzed by the sheer, calm truth of it. Then Nicholas shifted his gaze. He looked down at Sylvia. Sylvia was trembling now. The giggling was gone. She looked small in her massive, expensive dress. Nick, she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. Baby, please, don't do this. It's our wedding day. Nicholas looked at her with an expression I had never seen before. It was disappointment, pure, hollow disappointment. I saw you, he said simply. What? She whispered. I saw you laughing, Nicholas said. Your mother just called the woman who gave me life a disgrace. She humiliated her in front of everyone, and you didn't defend her. You didn't look shocked. You laughed. Sylvia flinched as if he had slapped her. I was just nervous. I didn't mean it. You did mean it, Nicholas said. You laughed because you think you're better than her. You think because she worked for a living, because she isn't rich, that she's a joke. He took a deep breath. I can't be married to someone like that, he said. I can't be part of a family like this. Nicholas. Sylvia screamed, standing up now, knocking her chair over. We are married. We signed the papers. Nicholas shook his head. The marriage is over, Sylvia. I'm not spending tonight with you. I'm not spending the rest of my life with you. I will file for the annulment tomorrow morning. The word annulment hit the room like a bomb. It was final. It was legal. It was the end. Sylvia collapsed back into her chair, sobbing into her hands. Her father looked ready to charge across the room, but something in Nicholas's posture stopped him. Nicholas looked dangerous in his calmness. He looked like a man who had nothing left to lose. Nicholas turned to me. He squeezed my arm gently. Let's go, Mom, he said softly. Let's go get some dinner. Somewhere quiet. Okay, I whispered. Okay, Nicholas. We started to walk. We walked right down the center of the room. We walked past the towering floral centerpieces. We walked past the untouched filet mignon. We walked past the women who had gossiped about me in the bathroom. I saw them as we passed. They were staring at their plates, unable to look me in the eye. It was the longest walk of my life, but it was also the proudest. I held my head high. I felt the fabric of my son's tuxedo jacket under my fingers. I listened to the sound of our footsteps on the marble floor. Click-clack, click-clack. Nobody tried to stop us. The shock was too great. Caroline was still standing on the stage, the microphone dangling from her hand, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She had tried to destroy me to assert her dominance. Instead, she had pushed her son-in-law right out the door. We reached the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom. Nicholas reached out and pushed one open. The cool air of the lobby hit my face. It felt fresh. It felt clean. We stepped out of the ballroom. The heavy door swung shut behind us with a solid thud, cutting off the view of the sobbing bride and the stunned guests. The silence in the lobby was different. It wasn't the silence of tension. It was the silence of freedom. Nicholas didn't stop. He didn't look back. He kept walking, leading me toward the exit, away from the gold and the glitter and the rot. I'm sorry, Mom, he said quietly as we reached the front doors of the hotel. Don't be, I said. You just made me the proudest mother in the world. He looked at me and gave a small, tired smile. I'm starving. Do you think that diner on 4th Street is still open? I think so, I said, and just like that, we walked out into the Chicago night, leaving the disgrace behind us and taking our dignity with us. 2 days later, my living room smelled like cinnamon coffee and old wood polish. It was a stark difference from the chemical smell of hairspray and expensive perfume that had choked me at the wedding venue. Here, in my small house on the quiet side of town, the air was clear. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one with the slightly worn velvet cushion that molded perfectly to my back. Nicholas was sitting on the sofa across from me. He was wearing an old pair of jeans and a t-shirt I hadn't seen him wear in years. He looked tired, yes. The dark circles were still there, but he also looked lighter. The tension that had been tightening his shoulders for months was gone. He was holding a mug of coffee, staring into the black liquid. I need to tell you something, Mom, he said, breaking the silence. Something I found out a few days before the wedding, but I didn't want to believe it. I set my cup down. What is it? Nicholas took a deep breath. You know how Caroline always made comments about money? How she acted like I was some charity case she was rescuing. I nodded. I remembered the bathroom conversation. I remembered the leech comment. It still stung. Well, Nicholas said, looking up at me, it was projection. All of it. What do you mean? I asked. They're broke, Mom, he said flatly. The Whitfords. They have nothing. I stared at him. But the wedding, the venue, the dress, that house. Least, Nicholas said, mortgaged to the hilt, maxed out credit cards. I found a letter on Caroline's desk when I was over there last week. It was a foreclosure notice for their summer home. I did some digging after that. They are millions in debt. They've been shuffling money around for years to keep up appearances. I sat back in my chair, stunned. The disgrace in a dress. The woman who had looked down her nose at my handmade quilt. The woman who had treated me like dirt because I wasn't wealthy. She was drowning in debt while I owned my home free and clear. That's why they pushed for the wedding so hard, Nicholas continued, his voice hardening. That's why Caroline was so obsessed with me getting that promotion last month. They didn't just want a son-in-law. They wanted a bailout. They needed my income to refinance their loans. They were banking on combining our finances immediately. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The leech comment in the bathroom. They weren't afraid I was taking Nicholas's money. They were afraid I would get in the way of them taking it. They were the parasites. They just dressed better. I feel so stupid, Nicholas whispered, rubbing his face with his hand. I let them treat you like that because I don't know. I thought they were just eccentric. I didn't see the desperation. You loved her, I said gently. Love makes us blind, Nick. It happens to the best of us. Not anymore, he said. I filed the papers this morning. The annulment is in motion, since we never consummated the marriage, and left the reception immediately. My lawyer says it will be clean. Just then, a noise from the driveway made us both jump. It was the sound of a car engine cutting off, followed by the slamming of doors. I stood up and walked to the front window. I pulled the lace curtain back just an inch. Parked in my modest driveway was a silver Mercedes. It looked out of place next to my hydrangea bushes. It's them, I said. Nicholas stood up immediately. You don't have to talk to them. I'll handle it. No, I said, a strange sense of calm washing over me. Let them come to the door. We watched as Caroline and Sylvia walked up the front path. They looked nothing like the polished queens of the ballroom 2 nights ago. Caroline was wearing oversized sunglasses, but I could see her face was puffy. Her hair, usually sprayed into a helmet, was pulled back in a messy bun. She was wearing yoga pants and a sweatshirt. Sylvia looked even worse. Her eyes were swollen red. She wasn't wearing makeup. She looked like a child who had been caught stealing candy. They stepped onto my porch. Knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed through the house. It wasn't the confident rap of a woman who owns the world. It was a hesitant, pleading sound. Nicholas walked to the door. He didn't open the main heavy wooden door immediately. He opened the viewing latch first, checking to make sure they couldn't just push their way in. Then he opened the heavy door, but kept the sturdy metal screen door locked tight between us and them. I stood behind Nicholas, visible, but out of reach. Nicholas! Sylvia cried out the moment she saw him through the mesh. She pressed her hands against the screen. Oh, thank God. Please, you have to talk to me. You can't just end it like this over a toast. It was just a toast. Caroline pushed up beside her daughter. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were bloodshot. Nicholas, be reasonable, Caroline said, her voice raspy. We have a reputation to uphold. People are talking. Do you know what you've done? You've humiliated us. We can fix this. We can put out a statement saying you were ill. We can have a private ceremony later. A statement. Nicholas laughed, a cold, dry sound. You're worried about a statement? Caroline, I know about the money. Caroline froze. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and old. I know about the foreclosure, Nicholas said. I know about the debt. I know that I was just a paycheck to you. Sylvia started sobbing. That's not true. I love you, Nick. You laughed, Nicholas said. He didn't raise his voice. When your mother called my mother a disgrace, you laughed. That told me everything I needed to know about your heart. And knowing what I know now, I think you laughed because you thought you had me trapped. You thought you had the fish on the hook. Please, Caroline whispered. The arrogance was gone. Please, Nicholas, we can work something out. We are family. Nicholas turned his back on them. He looked at me. Mom, he said. He stepped aside, giving me a clear view of the two women through the screen. It's your house, Nicholas said. And it's your call. Do you want to hear them out? Do you want to let them in? I looked at them. I looked at Caroline Whitford. 2 days ago, she had pointed a finger at me and told the world I was garbage. Now, she stood on my porch, shivering in the wind, needing the mercy of the woman she despised. I looked at Sylvia, the girl I had tried to welcome, the girl who had giggled at my pain. They looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. They were waiting for me to yell. They were waiting for me to scream. How dare you? They were prepared for a fight. They knew how to handle a fight. But I wasn't going to give them a fight. A fight implies that their opinion still matters to me. A fight implies that I am hurt. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was free. I looked Caroline dead in the eye. I didn't scowl. I didn't frown. I simply arranged my face into a look of polite, distant pity. Do you want to say anything to them? Nicholas asked. I looked at the disgrace in the mirror of the hallway stand. A strong woman, a debt-free woman, a mother who was loved. I turned back to the screen door. I slowly shook my head. No, I didn't say a word. I didn't offer a lecture on manners. I didn't offer forgiveness. I offered them nothing. I reached out for the heavy wooden door. Judith, wait. Caroline shrieked, stepping forward. You can't just... I smiled. It was a peaceful smile. And then, with a firm, steady hand, I pushed the wooden door shut. Thud. The sound was final. It cut off Sylvia's sobbing. It cut off Caroline's begging. It cut off the toxic connection that had threatened to ruin my son's life. I reached for the deadbolt. Click. I turned the lock. I rested my forehead against the cool wood of the door for a second, listening. I heard a muffled gasp from outside, then silence. Eventually, I heard the car doors slam and the engine start. I heard the tires crunch on the gravel as they backed away, retreating to their leased house and their mountain of debt. I turned back to the living room. Nicholas was watching me. He looked proud. "Coffee's getting cold," I said. "I'll make a fresh pot," he replied. We sat back down in the quiet, warm house. We didn't need to say anything else. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of respect. It was full of dignity. And for the first time in a long time, it was full of peace. It has been a month since the wedding that wasn't really a wedding. I sat at my kitchen table, watching the steam rise from my coffee mug. The morning light was pouring in through the window, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. It was quiet. It wasn't the lonely kind of quiet I used to feel when Nicholas first moved out. It was a peaceful quiet. It was the sound of a life that had been scrubbed clean of drama. Nicholas walked in, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He poured himself a cup and sat down opposite me. He looked different than he did a month ago. The hunch in his shoulders was gone. He had his color back. He was even dating again, not seriously, just coffee with a nice girl from his office who likes hiking and doesn't care about designer labels. "You're staring at me, Mom," he said, smiling over the rim of his mug. "I'm just looking," I said. "I'm checking to see if you're okay." "I am," he said, and for the first time in a long time, I believed him. "I really am." We sat there for a while, just listening to the refrigerator hum. I thought back to that moment in the ballroom. I thought about the insult that had echoed through the room. "That's not a mother. That's a disgrace in a dress." It's funny how words can change meaning over time. In that moment, those words felt like a knife. But now I realized they were a gift. If Caroline hadn't said that, if she had been just a little bit politer, just a little bit smarter, Nicholas might still be married to Sylvia. He might be living in that cold, leased house, working himself to death to pay off their secret debts. He might be waking up every day next to a woman who laughed at his mother. Caroline's cruelty was the key that unlocked his cage. I thought about my own silence, too. For years, I thought my job as a mother was to fight for him. I thought I had to be the shield. But that night, I learned that sometimes a mother's job is just to stand still. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. When she insulted me, every instinct in my body screamed to fight back. I wanted to yell. I wanted to defend myself. But if I had screamed, I would have just been noise. By staying silent, I became a mirror. My silence forced everyone in that room to see Caroline's ugliness reflected back at them without distraction. My silence gave Nicholas the space to find his own voice. "You know what I was thinking?" Nicholas asked, interrupting my thoughts. "What?" "I was thinking about that door," he said, "the way you closed it on them. It was precise." I laughed softly. It felt necessary. "It was," he agreed. "I think that was the moment I finally grew up. Watching you choose your dignity over their approval, it taught me more than any lecture ever could." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thanks for raising me, Mom. And thanks for saving me." "I didn't save you," I said, squeezing back. "You saved yourself. I just held the door." I looked out the window at my garden. The hydrangeas were blooming. The world was turning. We were safe. We were together. And we were free. I realized then that I wasn't a disgrace. I was a mother who had completed her hardest assignment, trusting her son to do the right thing. and he had passed with flying colors. As I finished my coffee, a strange sense of peace washed over me. It was the feeling of a storm that has finally passed, leaving the air crisp and clean. I looked at the empty chair, where guilt used to sit, and I realized there was no room for it anymore. But I do wonder sometimes, if they had knocked on your door, if they had stood on your porch crying and begging after humiliating you, what would you have done? Would you have closed the door, or would you have let them in? Let me know in the comments. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks, so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.